Welcome to Incentives Matter, your guide to what's new in behavioral science and behavioral economics. Let's see what's really driving decisions. Imagine walking into an old building, or maybe even your own office, and feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. A cold shiver down your spine, a feeling of being watched, maybe even a fleeting glimpse of something out of the corner of your eye. You rationalize it as being tired or overly imaginative. But what if it wasn't your imagination at all? What if it was just the air conditioning?
It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but the science actually backs it up. It's about a very specific frequency of infrasound, around 18 hertz, that has been repeatedly linked to these eerie, unsettling experiences. It's a frequency that cannot be consciously heard, but the body feels it.
So a faulty fan in the HVAC system could literally make you feel like you're in a haunted house? That's quite the nudge, albeit an unconscious and rather terrifying one. One might wonder how many ghostly encounters throughout history might have a far more mundane, yet still unsettling explanation.
Precisely. It's not about ghosts, but about the very real physiological and psychological impact of something largely undetectable by human ears. This phenomenon demonstrates how environmental factors, even those beyond conscious perception, can profoundly shape emotional state and even the interpretation of reality. This all sounds incredibly specific, 18 hertz. How did researchers even stumble upon such a precise connection between an unheard frequency and such a distinct psychological effect? Where did this idea that haunted feelings could be acoustical rather than supernatural even begin? The story often traces back to the 1980s and a British scientist named Vic Tandy who worked at Warwick University. He was in a research laboratory late one night, alone, when he started feeling intensely anxious and experiencing cold shivers. He even thought he saw a gray, misty figure out of the corner of his eye. It was genuinely unsettling. He was so convinced something was amiss that he even packed an overnight bag, anticipating he might need to flee.
So he was experiencing classic haunted symptoms. What changed his perspective?
The turning point came when he was working on his hobby, fencing. He'd brought his fencing foil into the lab, and he noticed that the foil's blade was vibrating furiously, even though there was no visible source of movement. That's when he put two and two together. He realized the vibrations were caused by a newly installed faulty exhaust fan in the lab. When he measured the frequency of the fan's output, it was almost exactly 18.98 hertz.
That's incredibly specific. So the fan was creating this low-frequency vibration that he couldn't hear, but his fencing foil could pick up, and then he realized his body was also picking it up.
Exactly. He made the leap that the vibrations from the fan, which were just below the threshold of human hearing, what is known as infrasound, were directly responsible for his feelings of unease, anxiety, and even the visual hallucination. It wasn't a ghost. It was the room itself, vibrating at a frequency that resonated with his internal organs. This discovery moved the phenomenon from the realm of the supernatural into psychoacoustics.
That's a fascinating origin story. It's a classic example of an astute observer connecting seemingly disparate dots. But how does something that cannot be heard actually affect individuals in such a profound, visceral way? What's the mechanism at play here?
The key lies in understanding that hearing is just one way sound is perceived. Infrasound, particularly around 18 hertz, doesn't register as an audible tone in the way speech or music does. Instead, it interacts with the body through pressure changes and vibrations. Internal organs like the lungs, stomach, and even the eyeballs have natural resonance frequencies. And it turns out some of these frequencies fall directly into the infrasound range.
So it's almost like the organs are vibrating in sympathy with the external sound wave, even though the ears aren't picking it up?
That's a good analogy. Think of it like a tuning fork. If you strike one tuning fork and then bring another one tuned to the exact same frequency close to it, the second one will start to vibrate without being directly touched. The human body, in a sense, acts as these resonant chambers. When a strong infrasound wave hits the body, it can cause subtle but perceptible vibrations in internal tissues and fluids. These aren't necessarily painful or even consciously registered as a vibration in the traditional sense, but the brain receives these signals.
And the brain, lacking an obvious external source for these internal sensations, then tries to interpret them, leading to these feelings of unease or dread?
Precisely. The brain is an amazing pattern recognition machine, and it's constantly trying to make sense of sensory input. When it receives signals of internal vibrations, pressure changes, or even slight disturbances in vision, because infrasound can vibrate the eyeballs, causing distortions, but there's no corresponding auditory input to explain it, it struggles. This lack of a clear external cause for internal discomfort creates a cognitive dissonance. The brain then often defaults to primal alarm systems, interpreting these unexplained physical sensations as a sign of danger or an unseen presence. That's incredibly powerful. The idea that the human body is responding to something that cannot be consciously identified, and the brain is essentially making up a story to explain the discomfort. This sounds like it could easily be dismissed as subjective experience, though. Was this ever put to a more rigorous empirical test beyond individual anecdotes?
Absolutely. The anecdotal evidence, while compelling, needed scientific validation. One of the most famous experiments was conducted by psychologist Richard Wiseman and his team. They set up an experiment during a live music concert. During two specific musical pieces, they secretly broadcast very low-frequency sound waves, around 17 hertz, very close to Tandy's 18 hertz, through large subwoofers placed at the venue. Crucially, the audience was unaware that this infrasound was being played.
So they had a control group, essentially, with the audience experiencing music both with and without the infrasound, and then they measured their reactions.
That's right. After the concert, audience members filled out questionnaires describing their experiences during each musical piece. The results were striking. When the 17 hertz infrasound was present, a statistically significant 22% of attendees reported feelings like unease, sorrow, nervousness, or experiencing cold shivers. They didn't know why they felt this way, they just knew they felt it.
That's a substantial percentage. A fifth of the audience experiencing these very specific, unsettling feelings and attributing them to the music or their own state, rather than this unseen environmental factor. It really underscores the unconscious power of this frequency.
It absolutely does. The Wiseman experiment provided concrete, empirical evidence that infrasound at these frequencies can reliably induce specific, negative emotional and physical responses in a significant portion of the population, even in a controlled setting where people are unaware of its presence. It moved the phenomenon from anecdote to scientific fact, demonstrating its potential as a subtle, non-auditory nudge on human emotional states.
Given this, one might wonder about all the places this might be happening without anyone realizing it. Beyond a faulty fan in a lab, where else might infrasound be a silent, unsettling presence in daily life?
That's exactly the question researchers began to ask. Once the mechanism was understood, they started looking for sources of infrasound in environments where people often report unexplained feelings of discomfort or creepiness. Old buildings are a prime example. They often have ventilation systems, heating ducts, or even structural elements that can generate low-frequency vibrations. Drafty windows and doors can also create air currents that resonate at infrasound frequencies.
So the very characteristics that make an old building feel atmospheric or historic might also be contributing to its perceived hauntedness.
Precisely. It's the brain's attempt to rationalize these unexplained physiological sensations. If you're in an old, creaky building and you feel a strange vibration or an inexplicable sense of dread, your brain's most accessible explanation, especially if you're primed by cultural narratives, might be a ghost or some malevolent presence. It's a classic example of attribution error, where a physiological response is misattributed to a supernatural or external psychological cause.
Are there any more modern sources of infrasound that might be affecting people beyond old HVAC systems?
Certainly, industrial machinery, large vehicles, and even natural phenomena like strong winds or seismic activity can generate infrasound. There's been ongoing debate, for instance, about the potential impact of infrasound generated by wind turbines on nearby residents, with some people reporting symptoms like sleep disturbance, headaches, and general malaise. While the science on wind turbines is still evolving and complex, the principle remains. Powerful, low-frequency vibrations can have physiological effects. Even the hum of modern traffic or the operation of large cooling units in commercial buildings could be subtle sources.
This touches on the core of behavioral science, doesn't it? How these unseen, unconscious forces can nudge feelings and behaviors. What are the broader implications here, both for understanding how people operate and for practical applications?
The implications are quite significant. First, it highlights the profound impact of the physical environment on psychological well-being, even beyond what can be consciously perceived. It suggests that a lot of what is attributed to personal stress, mood, or even the vibe of a place might be rooted in subtle physical stimuli. This is a powerful form of unconscious nudge.
So on one hand, it explains why some places just feel bad, even if you can't put your finger on it. But could this knowledge also be used intentionally? Could infrasound be used as a deliberate nudge?
It's a double-edged sword. Theoretically, yes, one could imagine deliberately introducing specific infrasound frequencies into environments to subtly influence mood. However, the ethical implications are huge. Deliberately inducing anxiety or unease without consent is highly problematic. The more constructive application is in mitigating its negative effects. For instance, in workplace design, understanding infrasound means acousticians and engineers can design environments to actively minimize these frequencies, potentially improving employee comfort, reducing stress, and even boosting productivity by removing an unseen environmental stressor.
So it's less about using it to manipulate and more about preventing unintended manipulation by the environment itself.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from what's wrong with me to what's wrong with my environment. For instance, if an office building has a consistent problem with employees reporting stress or feeling inexplicably anxious, checking for sources of infrasound, from elevator motors to ventilation fans, could be a critical yet often overlooked step. It's about creating environments that support well-being, not subtly undermine it. It challenges individuals to think more broadly about what constitutes a healthy or comfortable space.
The insights from this discussion are quite revealing. What are the key insights listeners should take away from the science of infrasound?
First, the human body perceives far more than conscious minds or ears can register. There's a whole world of sensory input happening below the threshold of awareness that still profoundly affects individuals.
That idea alone is quite a revelation, that the human body is constantly processing data the brain isn't explicitly acknowledging.
Indeed. Second, specific sub-audible frequencies like 18 hertz infrasound have a proven direct physiological impact that can trigger distinct emotional states, such as unease, anxiety, or even perceived supernatural presences. It's a very physical effect, not just a psychological one.
And third, the brain is phenomenal at making sense of the world, but when faced with unexplained bodily sensations, it will often construct narratives, even irrational ones, to fill that explanatory gap.
Absolutely. That attribution error is key to understanding why people might believe they're experiencing something paranormal when it's purely environmental. Finally, the practical takeaway is that environmental design, down to the subtle acoustic properties of a space, has a significant, often overlooked impact on well-being and behavior. There is a need for greater awareness of the silent polluters of emotional states.
So perhaps next time you feel a chill down your spine in an old attic, before you reach for the crucifix, maybe check the HVAC unit.
Or the rumble of that old refrigerator in the basement.
This definitely raises questions about what other unseen forces might be shaping daily experiences, moods, and decisions without people ever being truly aware of them. How much of stress or even comfort is purely psychological versus a subtle interaction with the physical environment? That's all for this episode of Incentives Matter. Join us next time as we keep unpacking what really drives decisions. Thanks for listening. Choose wisely, or at least know why you didn't.